By the late 1830s, the Oregon country was becoming well known to people living in the United States, though few white men had ever been there. First reports about the Oregon country came from several sources. Captain James Cook, an English explorer, told of the area in a report published in 1784. The American explorers Lewis and Clark, in 1805, described the resources of the Oregon area. In 1810, John Jacob Astor, a wealthy American merchant, established Fort Astoria in Oregon. The fort could be reached by either an overland or sea route. It became a headquarters for trappers and traders who searched for the fur-bearing animals of Oregon. Within a few years, a number of trading posts were established in Oregon by the Canadian Northwest and Hudson's Bay companies to handle the valuable fur trade. Following the trappers and traders came missionaries who brought the Christian way of life to the wilds of Oregon. In the United States, in the late 1830s, a bill was presented to Congress offering free land in Oregon to Americans who would settle there. To people who had been having hard times due to poor crops and poor prices, thoughts about a new region and a new start in life were very tempting. By the early 1840s, families from Missouri, Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, and even the Atlantic seaboard states started for Oregon. Covered wagons, sometimes drawn by horses, more often by oxen or mules, were used to make the long journey over the trail to Oregon. The jumping-off place was Independence, Missouri, and from there the trail wound through plains, deserts, and mountains. Nearly 2,000 miles of wilderness, dotted by a few trading posts and military forts. This way west became known as the Oregon Trail and was heavily traveled by pioneers during the 1840s and 50s. Our story tells of a pioneer journey to the Oregon country. This boy, Noah Atkins, made this journey with his parents and sister. Many, many years later, he recalled his experiences in a letter written to his granddaughter.
Dearest granddaughter, what was it like to journey to the Oregon country many, many years ago? To a 10-year-old boy like myself, it was the greatest of adventures. Traveling with me was Elizabeth, my sister, and there was dear Ma and Pa. We were going to Oregon from Missouri to start a new farm. On the very first day, I learned that the other folks in our wagon train had different reasons for making the journey. Mr. Kimpson was a wheelwright, hoping to set up a shop in Oregon. The Reverend Mr. Hawley and his wife were bound for missionary work with the Indians. Obadiah Foster was a blacksmith who hoped to find work in Oregon. His grown sons and their families, like most of us, were going to farm. The man who led our wagon train, Captain Thomas McDaniel, was our pilot. It was Captain McDaniel who advised us to start the journey in late April. That way, we'd reach Oregon country sometime in September. To do that, Pa figured we'd have to make about 15 miles a day. Any way you looked at it, it would be at least 5 months' travel. The first day we made camp early. After supper, Captain McDaniel told the men they would have to elect a council. The council would be our government on the trail. The men of the council would settle any arguments and would also act as lawmakers for the people of the train. After some talk, Mr. Kimpson, old Obadiah Foster, and Pa were elected as council. Proud? You bet I was. The first thing the council did was to set watches to guard the train. Pa drew the first watch of 4 hours. How he stayed awake, I don't know, because I was more tired than I'd ever been in my life. In fact, I was tired every night on the trail. You see, our days generally began about 4 or 5 in the morning. We had to make our miles before the sun got hot. A bugle blast would be sounded by the last man on watch. Right off, there was plenty of commotion in the camp. Wagons were checked, campfires were set, bread was baked, bacon was sliced and fried, while beans were set to boiling, and so was good, strong coffee. Our food was plain, and we had to eat it sparingly, because we couldn't carry much of it with us for fear of it spoiling or loading down the wagons. If our hunters made a kill, we'd also have fresh meat. Before every meal, Pa would say grace. Then we'd eat our simple food. Breakfast over, the women and girls broke camp. The men and boys would start hitching up the teams to the wagons. By 7 o'clock, we were ready to pull out. This routine kept up for about 10 weeks as we crossed the flat prairie lands. In that 10 weeks, we had come almost 900 miles, with more than 1,000 left on our journey. Sometimes I'd get to drive the team when Pa rode guard. Captain McDaniel said guards were always necessary in case we met up with Indians. And one day, Pa brought the news that he and Obadiah Foster had run into a band of Indians. I knew I shouldn't leave the wagon, but I wanted to see real live Indians. Obadiah knew their language and talked with the Indians. From the parts of the conversation I could make out, the Indians needed food. Pa figured that just this once, it wouldn't hurt to give the Indians what they asked for. Pa called back to me to bring up a small sack of cornmeal. I was good and scared as I walked up to the brave. He was very polite, and to tell the truth, I felt sorry that he and his people were going hungry. That was an exciting day. But most times our travels were quiet, even lonely. As we traveled, the girls wrote in their diaries or picked wildflowers, while the women would collect bits of fuel or take their turn driving. At times, the men would scout ahead, go hunting for fresh game, or drive, mostly drive, because we had to keep moving, moving, moving. When the weather got dry, dust was a big problem. The dust would sting our eyes. Sometimes we could hardly see. But still we kept moving. Rolling through South Pass, we knew we had reached the halfway mark on our journey. It was late July then, and we'd come about 950 miles. Seeing the Rocky Mountains ahead, we knew that another few days' journey would bring us to the edge of Oregon country. It was on the Sabbath that we came to the mountains. We stayed in camp to hear the Reverend Mr. Hawley preach a sermon. Afterwards, we prayed for strength to make good lives in Oregon. Then we had an old-fashioned hymn sing.
Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself.
Well, we safely crossed those Rocky Mountains, and as the days passed into August, we saw graves, reminders that not all who set out for Oregon reached their goal. One day, Captain McDaniel and I went looking for water. Water was hard to come by on some stretches of the trail. I thought I heard something. Captain McDaniel called out, but no answer. A family. The father ill with fever. They had been left by another wagon train which had moved on when the father did not get any better. We couldn't promise to take them with us. The folks of our wagon train would have to decide that. Captain McDaniel explained the situation to all of us. The abandoned family would slow us down our last few weeks on the trail, live off our already low supply, and they'd need a lot of care. Would we take them with us? A vote was called for. Yes. We pushed on with our new friends. With each mile, Oregon country became more pleasant and greener. Finally, we reached the banks of the Columbia River, the most welcome sight I'd ever seen. Within a week or so, we had reached our destination after 6 months of travel. Somewhere down there, we would settle and make our new farm. We had come a long way, but now we were home. Oregon.
Like the family in our story, many other pioneers continued to make the long journey to the Oregon country in the 1840s and 50s. The settlers cleared the land for farms, for towns, and more people came to build, to work. The blacksmiths and the wheelwrights, the newspaper editors and the lawyers, the school teachers and the doctors, the lumberjacks and the miners. And as more and more Americans made the pioneer journey to Oregon country, they strengthened the claims of the United States to this area. It was immigration along the Oregon Trail that helped to place the boundary at the 49th parallel between Canada and the Oregon country in 1846. 3 years later, in 1849, this area became a territory of the United States, which now stretched from sea to sea. The journey of the brave pioneers had linked a new, rich territory to a growing nation.